What's up, guys? Today we're going to talk about the top 3 things that could cost you when buying a home. So there's going to be a lot of little stuff when you're buying a home that's not really a big deal, like small plumbing leaks, holes in a drywall, even a bad water heater. The reason we're not worried about those things is because you're probably buying a $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 home even, and those things can be fixed easily. The things we're talking about here are things that could be, big issues with a home, things that could change the value of the house. So basically what we want to get to is how can we help you find the things that might either ruin a deal or could just cost you big after the fact. So the first of those red flags we're going to talk about is the foundation. When you walk into a house, there's some basic questions you should ask yourself, like number one, what type of foundation is it? Is the house on a basement? Is it poured concrete? Is it cinder block? Is it stacked on a bunch of old crusty bricks? So that's obviously pretty important to know right off the bat. If it's not a basement, is it a slab, crawl space? How big's the crawl space? How clean is the crawl space? All these things are factor into the decision you're going to make about whether this house is in good enough shape for you to consider. So, number one, if it's a basement, go in the basement. See if there's cracks in the walls, things like that. Those can all be signs that the house is settling. So you just want to be aware that those things are happening. And again, we bring this up because these are big items. If there's more than a slight crack, and kind of the basis here for what's considered a major crack in a foundation is going to be if it's more than a 1/4 inch wide or if it's off level with each other, meaning it's showing signs that wall is actually moving. But it is concrete. Keep that in mind too. There's 2 types of concrete: concrete that is already cracked and concrete that's going to crack. So you're going to see cracks in a foundation. That shouldn't run you off. Major cracks could potentially run you off. So that's part of a basement. If it's not a basement, the most common thing you're going to see for houses built in the last, say, 50 years is probably going to be slab foundations. And what that means is it doesn't have a basement, but it's on a concrete slab. It's just the floor of the house is concrete. These tend to be the least, require the least amount of maintenance. So that's really nice from that standpoint. They do have their downsides, which is that your plumbing and some of the other things in the house are encased in concrete. So if you need to do anything, they're not very accessible. They're going to be more accessible in a crawl space, but crawl spaces are going to have a ton of their own problems. Probably the biggest problem in crawl spaces is that they get moist under there. You get water under there that can create mold, can cause rotted wood, which in turn causes foundation issues. Another thing to pay attention to in a crawl space would be how much space is in the crawl space. And the reason that matters is because, number one, how easy is it to get under there to fix things when you need to, which is going to drive the cost to get those things fixed if you have somebody else do it. So pay attention to how big the crawl space is, also how clean the crawl space is. That can be pretty telling if the person before you has done a good job with, just keeping up with it and other things in the house. So all this to say that foundation is an item that probably can be about the most expensive thing you could potentially have to deal with in a house. It could range from anything from a couple $1,000s, but we've also seen things that could cost $30,000 to $50,000 if you've got a wall caving in a basement or something like that. So these are pretty important things that can absolutely change the value of your house and will be good to know before getting yourself into it. So item number 2 that we're talking about as far as our red flags go is the roof. The roof can be a pretty wide range of costs, but mostly just depends on the size of the house. Probably talking to replace a roof, minimum $5,000, $6,000, but could be easily up $15,000, $20,000 plus. So once again, this is another one of those items that we're talking about because we want you to hit these items that could change the value of the house and could cost you a significant amount of money down the road, which you may or may not have when it comes time. So this is a little more clean cut than foundations. The age of the roof is the single most important thing. So probably the most important thing you can do on this one is check the seller's disclosure. If the seller knows how old the roof is, they should put it on that seller's disclosure. If they don't put it on the seller's disclosure and they write, "I don't know," that doesn't necessarily mean they're dodging the question. Probably means they never replaced a roof and they don't know when it was replaced. And since roofs last 25 to 30 years, that's not uncommon. People live in their houses an average of 5 to 7 years. So probably a good chance most of you have never replaced a roof in your house, so you wouldn't know how old that roof is. But nevertheless, look at the seller's disclosure. If they know, they should tell you. Once again, 25 to 30 years is kind of a normal length of time for a roof. So if you're getting up to 15, 20, 25 years, you probably need to start keeping in mind that that could be an expense for you going forward. So as far as actually inspecting it while you're there, number one, like I always say, get a home inspector. They're going to know more about this than you are. And even if they don't, you can bring in a roofer after the fact to actually look at that, maybe give you some quotes, give you an idea of if it even needs repair or anything like that. So, you can tell from the ground. You might be able to notice some missing shingles. You might be able to notice some staining. But mostly, like, what's the coloration of the roof look like? Is it a dimensional shingle? Dimensional shingles are something that I would say 90% plus of modern roofs that are put on are dimensional shingles. So if it's not a dimensional shingle, I mean, it's just the old school single tab shingle, ask your realtor if you don't know what that looks like. If it's a single tab shingle, probably a decent chance the roof's older. So that's kind of my first tell. Again, you also look at the coloration to see if it's faded, anything like that, give you a decent idea. Like I said, the inspector will take a guess. They'll give you an idea based on how much of the granules are left and things like that, and give you an idea of how old that roof is. Nothing's going to be exact, but they will let you know those things. But as I always say, if it's something you notice at the showing before you have to pay $400 or $500 plus for an inspection, maybe you can save a little money by saying, well, maybe you write it into the offer that we're writing it at a certain price, but we want a new roof before it's done, or we want closing costs covered so that we can maybe handle the roof later ourselves, things like that. Anything you know up front before you get into that inspection or into the transaction at all is helpful in making sure that transaction goes smooth. And the last red flag we're going to talk about today is HVAC, or heating and air. So once again, we bring this up because it can be an expensive thing. If you have to replace a furnace and or the AC unit outside, you're probably talking bare minimum maybe $6,000, but could get up quite a bit more depending on the size of the house and what type of unit you're using, things like that. So one thing I always say about HVAC units is they are a lot like cars. When you're buying a used car, just like when you're buying a used house, it's going to very much depend on the person who took care of that before you. It's hugely important to change out that furnace filter. If you haven't changed out the furnace filter in 5 years, it's going to be running hard on the unit, all those things. There's a good chance that thing could be ready to go way before its lifeline. But if the previous owner has been really good about those furnace filters, or maybe has done some preventative maintenance work along the way, who knows, that unit could last 20, 25 plus years. So it's just really hard to say. So it's if there are any service records from the HVAC company who installed it or came back and done service, that's always good to see. A lot of times they'll just write that on the side of the furnace, so you can tell pretty easily what's going on there. So another thing to think about is what kind of unit is in the house. So the two most common in our area are just going to be a regular gas furnace and a heat pump. When I say heat pump, what that means is it's an all-electric unit, which has its upsides. It means you probably don't have a gas bill unless you have gas on something else. So that can be nice. However, heat pumps are mostly used in a little bit more moderate climates than ours. So most of the year it's okay, but just like here a couple weeks ago when it hit 1 degree outside, it starts to struggle. And when it struggles, it doesn't keep up, and it kicks in what's called the auxiliary heat, which is going to run basically like a massive standalone electric unit, which uses a ton of electricity and can easily double your electricity bill. So the gas furnace is going to keep up a lot better in those climates. So while you do have the gas bill, your bill is going to be a little bit more standard because it's not going to have to labor that much more for colder weather than it will be for normal weather. There's our 3 red flags. If you want to steer clear of these things, first and foremost, get a home inspection. But even better, if you can spot some of these things in the original showing, then you could handle things a little bit differently. A, you can adjust your offer on the house to account for the items you know will have to be addressed. This can make it a little more certain that the deal will go through, and it'll also potentially save you some money on a home inspection if you just decide that you don't want to go through with it. So that brings me to option B, save yourself the money, walk away from the deal before it ever gets there. So maybe you decide that this particular thing isn't going to be handled the way that you want it to be handled, and you can just walk on and go to the next house if that's important to you. So All this may sound like a lot, and it is a lot, but that's why you hire a professional to help you through the process. So if y'all have any more questions or need help buying or selling your house, definitely reach out to us.